November 12, 2022. It's only a few weeks away from Thanksgiving in Cleveland, Ohio.
In the city of Cleveland, a lot of people look forward to Thanksgiving because it reminds people of family. It gives us a chance to kind of huddle together and have kind of a respite from the day-to-day grinds of society.
The leaves are turning, people are getting prepared to have their meals, and there's just a sense of excitement in the air.
Cleveland resident Candy Moore is no exception. But on this chilly Saturday morning, as she's scrolling through social media, Candy sees a post that takes her breath away.
It's a Instagram post from the account Cleveland Remembrance page. It's kind of like a unofficial neighborhood news source.
The post mentions Candy's niece, 23-year-old Adriana Taylor.
Adriana Taylor is missing.
The post was from some friends that had given the page information that she'd been missing for quite some time.
But this is the first time Candy is hearing about Adriana's disappearance.
It had to be kind of shocking to find out from a social media post that your loved one is missing.
At the time that the aunt finally saw the information, her niece had been missing almost 30 days.
Concerned by what she's just read, Candy tries to contact Adriana, but her calls go straight to voicemail.
That alarmed her.
She thought something was going on that wasn't right.
Your mind is spiraling. You're trying to figure out exactly how this could ever happen to you or your family member and how to fix it as quickly as possible.
23-year-old Adriana Taylor grabbed attention wherever she went.
Her smile, her heart, she would talk to everybody, make everybody feel good. She was fun.
She was such a loving and supportive person to the people that were around her.
She was very generous. She would give you the shirt off her back.
Adriana's inner light was all the more remarkable given her upbringing.
She didn't have the easiest of lives.
The parents weren't really in the picture all that much. She bounced around from family and friends.
Adriana was one of 6 kids and pretty much was raised by her grandparents.
It's common for people who don't have that relationship or that bond with their parents to not be able to flourish, but Adriana was able to beat those odds.
She had been through some things, but had come out on top with a good heart and a good spirit.
As soon as she was able, Adriana joined the workforce.
She had a job at the distribution plant. She was a hard worker.
She was out here trying to make a better life for herself by making an honest living.
Adriana really was committed to living a life of stability and family because that was what she was missing and that's what she craved.
So when Adriana's coworker, 43-year-old Anthony Kennedy, began showing interest in her, she was intrigued.
Hey, Adriana.
Hey.
How was your weekend?
It was good. I just chilled. It was pretty nice.
She wanted somebody who would protect her, somebody who would provide for her, somebody who would love her.
Somebody like Anthony.
Anthony was a nice guy, quiet, reserved. He wore glasses. He seemed responsible.
He was actually her supervisor, but he was creative, he was intelligent, good with numbers, he was helpful.
He showed Adriana that he was interested in her, he pursued her.
So look, this may sound a little weird, but are you busy later?
No, I was just gonna go home. Why?
Would you like to go to dinner?
I would love that.
Anthony on paper, checked the boxes, being loving, being financially secure.
They had that chemistry and things just moved on from there.
Before they knew it, Adriana and Anthony were building a life together.
The relationship moved very quickly. They moved in, they fell in love.
He says, I love you. I want to make a life with you. You can see why she would have thought this is the perfect guy. Adriana's life was becoming something that she had longed for. Having a secure relationship that was going to last.
But now, just 2 weeks before the start of the holiday season, Adriana's aunt, Candy Moore, has come across an alarming social media post.
The post says that Adriana's missing.
She was concerned. She wanted answers about what had happened to Adriana.
This is Adriana's aunt.
Candy immediately reaches out to Adriana's friend, Michaela Knowles, who appears to have submitted the post to the Cleveland Remembrance page.
Why didn't you contact us sooner?
I don't know. I guess I just got nervous. I was blowing things out of proportion.
But Michaela says the last time she talked to Adriana on October 8th, something definitely seemed off.
While they were on the phone, she heard something disturbing.
She said that she sounded a little scared.
Is everything okay over there?
Gunshots were heard in the background, and the phone disconnected.
Adriana.
That was her last interaction, and no one had heard from her since.
After overcoming a difficult upbringing, 23-year-old Adriana Taylor had finally found her footing in life.
She had a good job. She had friends that cared about her.
She also found the man she wanted to share a future with, her co-worker, 43-year-old Anthony Kennedy.
What she saw in Anthony was a maturity. Anthony filled that void that a less mature man of her age couldn't give her.
But now Adriana's aunt, Candy Moore, is panicking after discovering that her niece hasn't been seen in over a month.
The last time that anyone reportedly heard from Adriana, gunshots were heard in the background.
Adriana.
This is extremely concerning.
It's a wonder why the friend didn't come right out and report that. And a lot of times, people just don't want to get that deeply involved. They don't know if it's really something, if it's really nothing.
I am so sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I was just so scared.
Within the African American community, there is a distrust of our police force. And it makes it hard to trust that they're going to follow through, they're going to care.
Regardless, Adriana's aunt knows it's time to involve the authorities. So on November 13th, 2022, she contacts the Cleveland Police Department to report Adriana missing.
She loved Adriana and she wanted her found.
Thank you for coming in, ma'am. Now, it's our understanding the last contact anyone had with her was October, is that correct?
That's what I was told.
We kind of learned that there seemed to be a little bit of strain with the family, and not speaking on a regular basis didn't seem super unusual. She didn't have contact with her family or even friends every day.
Adriana's aunt tells the police that her niece has been living with a boyfriend, Anthony Kennedy.
She also tells them about Adriana's disturbing final phone call.
Her friend said that they were talking on the phone when she heard gunshots.
The first thing that popped in my head was, why weren't we told about this sooner?
The timeline is very disturbing. Adriana was last seen in October, but she wasn't declared officially missing until almost mid-November. What happened in that time frame?
We need to immediately jump on this investigation.
Police start by heading to the rental Adriana and Anthony shared on the west side of town.
They knocked on the door and no one answered. It didn't look like anyone was home.
Detectives call Anthony and leave a voicemail asking him to contact them as soon as possible. And while they wait to hear back, they put out an APB on Adriana's car, a white Ford sedan.
Upon finding out Adriana had a car registered to her, I immediately took steps to find out if the vehicle's been towed, if it's in the impound lot, if it was, seen anywhere on any law enforcement databases.
Police learned that Adriana's vehicle was last spotted by traffic cameras on October 12th, over a month earlier.
Which was just a few days after her friend had spoken with Adriana.
Adriana's vehicle was last seen traveling towards Pennsylvania.
Cleveland police issue an alert for law enforcement in and around western Pennsylvania to be on the lookout for Adriana's vehicle.
Our primary concern is, where is this car?
But even though Adriana's vehicle is still in the wind, her boyfriend, Anthony Kennedy, has finally resurfaced.
He agreed to come down to the police station for an interview.
Once Anthony gets interviewed by detectives, his story is that Adriana has moved out of his house a month ago or so.
She lived with you for a couple of months, but left about a month ago. Mm-hmm. So by the beginning of October?
Beginning of October into September.
Anthony says that while he and Adriana were in love a few months earlier, that changed fast after she moved in with him.
Anthony told police that Adriana had a drug habit.
Anthony says he first heard gossip about Adriana's drug use at work, but he refused to believe it.
There's all these rumors, but I'm like, don't come to me in a rumor, because unless I physically see it, I don't know, right? Then I found the little blue pills.
He noted that the drug was fentanyl, and we know that there's an opioid crisis in America.
They should stand with me, and they would disappear for a few days, stay 2 days, disappear for a day, stay 3 days, disappear for a week.
Anthony claimed that she couldn't keep her job because she couldn't hold it together with all of the substance abuse.
As her supervisor, Anthony says he was forced to fire her from her role at the distribution plant. And he soon put his foot down at home, too.
I told her, I said, you can't be here no more. You gotta leave. You're causing too much problems. You're doing drugs.
He ended the relationship.
Anthony!
He's kicked her out.
And he says he hasn't talked to her since.
I think I tried to call her. She didn't answer. I just went straight to voicemail.
However, Anthony tells detectives he's heard whispers about what Adriana's been up to since their breakup.
There's rumors around where, she's thinking what to do.
Anthony told police that Adriana had gotten back with an ex-boyfriend.
But Anthony's weary to give detectives the ex-boyfriend's name.
I don't want to end up dead.
No, I don't want you to end up dead either.
I have a name, but I don't.
The reason for his anxiety soon becomes clear.
Anthony told police that Adriana used to date somebody who was a known drug dealer.
This wasn't some small-time street corner dealer. This was somebody who was moving weight.
A big name, a big drug name.
The type of man who could make a person disappear.
This is a dangerous man we're talking about.
They're guns, they're killers, they don't play.
"48 hours after 23-year-old Adriana Taylor was reported missing in Cleveland, Ohio, her co-worker turned boyfriend, Anthony Kennedy, has just given police their first lead.
Anthony told police that Adriana had started using drugs and that maybe she had gotten back with an ex-boyfriend who was a drug dealer.
And I believe she's messing. I don't know if he's the kingpin or one of the bigger people there.
However, Anthony is hesitant to tell the investigators everything he knows.
Well, just hang tight. It's okay. All right?
I don't want my life to be in danger.
Okay, I don't want your life to be in danger either.
Ultimately, Anthony pushes through his fear to give the police a name, or at least a nickname.
Bear. Bear? Like the animal or the drink? Bear? Okay.
He mentions this male, goes by the name of Bear, but alludes to the fact that he has something to do with her disappearance.
I feel like my life's in danger now. I really do. The declarations I just gave you, I feel like my life's in danger.
Anthony goes on to say he's heard rumors that Bear is expanding his drug operation.
The guy that she was with was actually trying to expand into Pennsylvania.
Could that explain why Adriana's car was last seen traveling in that direction?
There was a possibility that this was the reason that Adriana was going to that area because of her new relationship with Bear.
And if Bear is as dangerous a person as Anthony's saying, it's all the more reason police need to look into him.
It's not something that the police can overlook.
Police know drugs and violence go hand in hand. If something happened to Adriana, this could be the explanation.
But before the detectives can make much headway in locating Bear, a new lead emerges from yet another state, West Virginia.
Turns out Adriana's car was pulled over in West Virginia in October.
The traffic stop occurred on October 3rd, a week before surveillance cameras spotted the vehicle heading toward Pennsylvania, and just a few days before Adriana's alarming phone call with her friend, Michaela Knowles.
There were two people in the car. It's not known if the other passenger was Bear, but what is known is that there was possible drugs in the car.
The officer who pulled them over noted that the car had illegally tinted windows and was seen leaving a known trap house. However, no drugs were located in the vehicle at that time.
They were allowed to leave with just a citation for the tinted windows.
The information investigators are hearing seems to line up with what they've learned from Anthony Kennedy.
I told her, you're causing too much problems. You're doing drugs.
But where is Adriana now? And what about the man she was last seen with?
We followed up on these leads. We reached out to hospitals, some of the shelters, normal places where you would expect someone that maybe had OD'd or was looking for some kind of help would turn up, and we found no trace of that at all.
And it was like she just vanished.
At this point of the investigation, there now seems to be more questions than answers.
But then, detectives receive a promising phone call from their colleagues in Pennsylvania.
We received information from a small suburb of Pittsburgh that they had towed her car. It was just abandoned on the street in a no parking zone.
I don't know where the car was at exactly, but put them on the dirt on the tires.
Obviously, it's been sitting a while with these leaves and stuff.
Cleveland investigators think this could be the break they've been waiting for.
We got pretty excited when we found out that her car had been found. Now again, we have another tangible lead that we can follow.
However, when Cleveland detectives arrive in Pennsylvania to examine Adriana's vehicle themselves, their hopes soon turn to new fears.
They notified us that they found quite a bit of cleaning solution throughout the vehicle.
There were several spots of blood spatter.
The alarm bells rang.
On November 16th, 4 days into the search for 23-year-old Adriana Taylor, Cleveland detectives have learned that Adriana's missing sedan has been located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh police let them know, hey, this car's been abandoned here for a little bit. I think you guys should come and look at it.
We immediately made arrangements to travel to Pittsburgh, to the area where her vehicle was recovered.
And when detectives arrive to examine the vehicle, they make a troubling discovery.
We learned the car had been cleaned.
Someone had scrubbed the vehicle from top to bottom.
But that's not all.
There were several spots of blood spatter on both the inside and outside of the vehicle. And the blood was a match for Adriana Taylor.
It's evidence that points to a disturbing possibility.
It seems like there's foul play.
That kind of gave me more of an alarm bell, as like something really might be wrong here.
With this chilling new evidence in tow, detectives start making rounds with residents on the street where Adriana's abandoned vehicle was found.
We were able to canvass the neighborhood.
They quickly turn up a promising witness.
And we're here because there was a car found in your alley.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
familiar with this.
Yeah.
We know
The man describes something suspicious he witnessed on the night of October 12th.
I saw the car pull up, okay. The guy got out of the car and he opened both back doors, took something out in a plastic bag and threw it in the dumpster that was back there. Then he checked the rest of the car around, didn't open the trunk, but he did check the rest of the car and then locked the doors and then walked that way.
Walk that way, okay. Yeah.
We learned from witnesses on scene that someone dropped off the car, cleaned it, and threw away some cleaning supplies in a dumpster.
Detectives search the dumpster for evidence, but they're out of luck.
The dumpster had already been emptied several times since the incident occurred. It was frustrating to miss out on whatever that evidence might have been.
Now more concerned than ever that Adriana's disappearance could involve foul play, investigators circle back to inform Adriana's Aunt Candy of what they've learned so far.
Adriana's loved ones were still hopeful that she would be found alive, but it was becoming harder to hold on to those hopes by the day.
It was devastating. You can't wrap your mind around it.
Hoping to verify the leads they've gotten from Anthony Kennedy, detectives inquire about Adriana's alleged drug use.
We did end up verifying that she was friends with some individuals that, did have a history of drug behavior.
But the people who know Adriana best insist she wasn't a part of that.
She didn't use drugs at all.
Maybe some pot here and there, but that was it.
Are you sure about that?
Absolutely.
We weren't really able to substantiate that she was ever into drugs.
Detectives also inquire about the man known as Bear, who Anthony penned as Adriana's drug-dealing lover.
Okay, what about a guy named Bear? Do you know him?
Yeah, I knew him. He was a friend of hers.
A boyfriend, right?
No, just a friend.
From what we were getting from everyone, Bear was like a brother to Adriana.
Okay, do you know if he was dealing drugs?
Bear? No way.
Michaela laughed at the idea of Bear being involved in drug dealing. She said that's not the kind of guy that he was at all.
Which forces the investigators to rethink everything they've been led to believe.
Anthony told us Bear deals drugs, and he was kind of casting blame upon him.
They're goons, they're killers, they don't play.
Police are not sure what's going on, how truthful this is.
It set off suspicions. Well, what's really going on here?
With Michaela's help, police are finally able to track down Bear, who they identify as 25-year-old Jabari Williams.
Were you in a romantic relationship with Adriana?
Nah, nothing like that. I mean, we hung out sometimes.
He was, in fact, Adriana's friend.
It was just an amicable relationship between two adults.
And according to Jabari, he hasn't seen Adriana in months.
When was the last time you saw her?
Probably July, maybe August.
His phone records appear to support what he's telling the police.
Other than what Anthony had told us about Bear, there was really no link between Bear and Adriana around the time of her disappearance.
Now with Bear in the clear, all roads lead back to one man, Anthony Kennedy.
It just seemed like Anthony had created a scapegoat almost, and wanted us to believe it was Bear.
Hoping to learn more about Anthony's relationship with Adriana, detectives head to the distribution plant where they both worked.
Once the police start to have these conversations with Adriana's co-workers, they start to make connections that Adriana and Anthony's relationship was not as pleasant as they thought it was.
According to co-workers, the couple's relationship had been a source of trouble from the beginning.
Anthony had actually been written up at one point because of his relationship with Adriana. As her direct supervisor, he shouldn't have had any kind of, extracurricular relationship with her.
The 20-year age gap between them also made some of their colleagues uncomfortable.
The age difference was somewhat alarming.
What it says to me about Anthony is that he was looking for someone who he would be able to maybe manipulate or even control.
When detectives ask Adriana's co-workers about the circumstances under which she was fired, they realize Anthony has misled them once again.
Adriana was let go, but she was not let go, the distribution center said, because of drugs.
She was ultimately let go because of 2 no-call, no-shows.
Her firing happened in early October, around the same time she went missing.
That would mean that Anthony Kennedy's version of what happened seemed to be a lie.
In the weeks after Adriana disappeared, employees say that Anthony's behavior grew increasingly alarming.
Anthony told one of their co-workers that he had cameras installed in their home to be able to see what Adriana was doing.
He has almost like an obsession with her. He would watch her on his camera. He talked about her constantly.
Anthony's co-workers tell detectives that when a rumor began to spread in October of 2022, his obsession evolved into jealousy.
There was some rumors going around that there was a video out there of Adriana engaging in sexual activity with another man that worked at the distribution center.
What are you laughing at?
Nothing, man. Just a video we found online, dude. Chill.
It was never proven that this was true, but this was certainly something that Anthony himself heard.
We learned from coworkers of Anthony that he made some offhand comments that he's going to kill her because of this alleged infidelity in their relationship.
She's done!
What is this problem?
But as investigators dig deeper, they're shocked to discover Anthony was the one making moves behind closed doors.
Anthony was living a double life.
We learned that he was actually married.
Detectives investigating the disappearance of 23-year-old Adriana Taylor have just unearthed alarming new information about her 43-year-old boyfriend, Anthony Kennedy.
There was a rumor going around work that Anthony was jealous because he'd heard that Adriana had made a sex tape with someone else.
She's done!
What are you talking about?
Anthony was heard to have said that he was going to kill her.
It's really disturbing. It kind of makes you wonder, like, what is going through his head?
And as investigators dig deeper into Anthony's past, they learn that they've only scratched the surface.
Anthony was hiding a lot of secrets, but one of the biggest secrets he was hiding was that he was married. Anthony was living a double life. He was legally married to somebody else, but here he was, pursuing this younger woman at work.
When detectives contact Anthony's wife, Anastasia, she agrees to come into the station to speak with them.
Anastasia was shocked to find out that Anthony had been living with a woman in his apartment for 4 months.
I just can't believe this.
I'm so sorry, ma'am.
Anastasia tells detectives that she and Anthony were married in July of 2022, but even after exchanging vows, her husband insisted on keeping separate residences.
He was telling her that he has this lease that he can't break, and he has to stay here until it's over with.
When their leases were up, they were supposed to move in together.
Anastasia's work as a traveling nurse meant the couple spent long periods of time apart.
She had not seen Anthony in the whole month of October.
She had no idea that he was essentially living 2 lives. She was in complete disbelief. So he must have done a good job of keeping his 2 lives completely separate.
As far as the investigators are concerned, they've heard everything they need to know about Anthony Kennedy. Now, they just need to find him.
They move in for the arrest, but Anthony is on the run.
However, investigators secure a warrant to search the rental he once shared with Adriana.
Inside the apartment, it's packaged as if someone's moving, and we're immediately struck by the living room.
The carpet had been ripped up.
It was at that time that we all kind of got a sinking feeling and knew something bad had happened here.
Investigators find more concerning evidence in Anthony's backyard.
There's a giant burn mark in the rear of the driveway with what appears to be fabric within it.
Anthony had burned something large back there.
At this point, obviously, Anthony is suspect number one.
And the next day, he finally shows up at the Cleveland Police Department, ready to talk.
He wanted to kind of get this straightened out and take care of it.
Investigators start asking questions.
The carpeting being removed from the apartment. Why'd you do that?
Because of bed bugs.
Anthony also attributes the burn marks in his driveway to bed bugs.
Where did you see the bed bugs at?
I saw her on the couch because it bit me, and I was all in the lining of the couch.
So you cut the couch up?
I cut the couch up and burned it.
Our initial reaction was deception. Everything he said to us seemed to be deceptive, short answers, kind of not making sense, talking in circles.
But as much as police suspect Anthony's involvement in Adriana's disappearance, they lack the physical evidence to prove it.
Things are still very circumstantial. There's actually not even a body. We, at this point, don't even know whether Adriana is dead or alive.
So as the Thanksgiving holiday approaches, the prime suspect in Adriana's disappearance remains a free man.
We've kind of come to a bit of a standstill on it. After the holidays, we're going to regroup, hit it hard again.
But on the night of November 24th, a stunning discovery immediately reignites the investigation.
Oh, shine that on there. That's a hand.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God.
2 weeks after 23-year-old Adriana Taylor was reported missing, the investigation into her disappearance has come to a standstill.
The police had suspected that Adriana's boyfriend, Anthony Kennedy, was behind her disappearance. However, they didn't have enough evidence to prove it.
But at 11 p.m. on the night before Thanksgiving, as Cleveland investigators lay sleeping, police 140 miles away in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, are responding to an alarming 911 call.
The landlord is calling police because a suspicious male appears to be digging in his backyard, and he's watching the whole thing live on his cameras.
By the time police arrive, the mystery man has fled.
He was back here for an hour. We had him on camera. Dude had cement.
That's weird.
Was immediately suspicious, and the landlord wants the spot dug into. He wants to know what he's doing back there.
Okay, let me try to get on that side and I'll try to lift it up.
Ultimately, the police kind of moved the debris, fresh, wet concrete, underneath all of this.
Something's in there, man.
I hope it's not a dead body. Shine that on there. That's a hand.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God.
After radioing for backup, officers speak to the landlord's tenant, who had been living inside his rental property for several months.
They showed her the security video, and she instantly recognized the man on the tape.
So this guy's your relative?
He's my brother.
What's your brother's name?
Anthony Kennedy.
When news of these events reaches Cleveland, the detectives working Adriana's missing persons case are stunned.
I woke up Thanksgiving morning to about 100 missed calls, and come to find out that they had found Adriana's body in Pennsylvania. And there was Ring camera footage. I was in disbelief. Like, all of our jaws were on the floor. Like, it's very rare to discover a buried body, let alone capture the whole thing on 4K HD video.
An autopsy soon confirms just how Adriana died.
Adriana was killed with a single gunshot wound to the top of her head. From the angle, it appeared that she had to have been laying or sitting at the time she was shot.
Investigators believe Adriana was killed not long after she spoke to Michaela Knowles on the phone for the last time. And when they received video footage seized from Anthony's home security cameras, their suspicions are confirmed.
On the day that we're pretty sure Adriana is killed, Anthony comes home from work, distraught, rips down the camera, and at the same time, inside the home, you see Adriana wearing the exact clothing that she was found buried in.
Although what happened next wasn't caught on camera, investigators are confident they now know how Adriana died.
When Anthony takes that camera off, it really just tells us that he intends to do something bad.
Police believe that Adriana and Anthony got into a fight.
A fight over a videotape that didn't exist.
They started arguing over the supposed videotape of Adriana sleeping with another man.
How could you do this to me? Anthony, you need to calm down. I didn't do anything to you, okay?
You're a liar!
Lying about...
Everybody at work talking about
What
it.
are you talking about? Nobody said anything. Whatever it is, it might be a lie.
He thought that Adriana was cheating on him. He felt betrayed and angry.
Investigators believe that during a break in the argument, Adriana made a phone call to her friend, Michaela.
Well, what are you up to?
But Anthony wasn't done.
So you think you can just disrespect me, right?
Girl, just hold on. Give me 1 second.
Anthony was waving a gun around and began firing.
Calm down, Anthony, please!
However, police believe the gunshots Adriana's friend heard on the phone weren't the ones that killed her.
We believe that she was shot laying down on the couch, possibly even shot taking a nap, which is the reason for the couch being burned in Anthony's backyard.
It's completely premeditated. It's unfeeling. It's horrific.
After Adriana was dead, Anthony came up with a plan to hide her body in the backyard of his sister's rental home, 140 miles away in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
When he became a suspect in the investigation, he started to worry that he hadn't done a good enough job.
As police closed in on him, Anthony returned to his sister's rental the night before Thanksgiving to improve the burial. And thanks to the landlord's surveillance camera, it was all caught on tape.
Between the first burial and the second reburial, the landlord had actually signed up for a free trial to ring. Unfortunately for Anthony, he picked the time to rebury the body right in the middle of that free trial. There's some kind of divine intervention.
Investigators are now confident they have the evidence they need to charge Anthony with Adriana's murder.
He's obviously dangerous, so it was our top priority to get him in custody. A lawyer reaches out to us and says that he's been retained by Anthony's family, and this lawyer negotiated his surrender.
Anthony eventually turns himself in and immediately starts talking about a plea deal.
Once he was in custody, it was a lot of conversation between lawyers, but he ended up taking a plea.
Despite Anthony's willingness to plead guilty, the court shows him little mercy.
The judge sentenced Anthony to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years.
I think Anthony is where he belongs.
Fueled by rage and jealousy, Anthony Kennedy committed an act of unthinkable violence.
It seemed like Anthony really wanted to have it all. He wanted to be able to live his life in ways that he wanted to, while also controlling how other people live their lives.
And in his pursuit of power and control, he destroyed the life of a young woman whose future was full of promise.
She wanted to make something of herself. She was on her way.
This is a cautionary tale for everyone, especially young women. Be careful of who you select as your partner and do your due diligence. At the end of the day, it could save your life.
On the morning of February 13, 2009, the streets of Escondido, California looked no different from countless other Friday mornings. The sun had barely climbed above the rolling hills of northern San Diego County. Commuters merged onto familiar roads. Parents hurried children toward school before heading to work. Teenagers walked along sidewalks carrying backpacks that seemed heavier than they really were, filled with textbooks, notebooks, and the quiet routines of ordinary life. It was the kind of morning that disappears into memory almost as soon as it begins. Yet before that morning was over, one 14-year-old girl would vanish so completely that investigators, volunteers, and an entire community would spend more than a year searching for answers. Her name was Amber Duboce. For 13 months, her disappearance would haunt Southern California. Thousands of people would search canyons, parks, trails, and neighborhoods. Flyers bearing her smiling photograph would appear on storefront windows, telephone poles, and bulletin boards. Search dogs would comb open fields. Helicopters would circle overhead. Detectives would chase every phone call, every rumor, and every possibility they could find. But despite one of the largest missing child investigations the region had ever seen, Amber seemed to have vanished without leaving behind a single clear trail. There were no confirmed ransom demands. No verified sightings after that morning. No financial activity. No physical evidence pointing investigators toward a suspect. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed her. The mystery became even more unsettling because Amber disappeared during one of the safest moments of an ordinary day. She was not hiking through a remote forest. She was not traveling alone across the country. She was not out late at night. She was walking to school along a route she had taken before, in daylight, through a neighborhood filled with homes, businesses, and other people beginning their day. How could someone simply disappear under those circumstances? That question echoed through Escondido for months. Families who had once allowed their children to walk to school without hesitation suddenly drove them instead. Parents found themselves glancing over their shoulders in grocery store parking lots. Neighbors who had greeted one another for years began locking doors that had previously remained open during the day. Fear settled into the community not because people knew what had happened, but because they didn't. The unknown can sometimes be more frightening than the truth. As weeks turned into months, hope slowly collided with reality. Search efforts continued, but every empty field, every dry creek bed, and every wooded trail that failed to reveal new evidence deepened the mystery. Detectives faced the nightmare scenario every investigator dreads: a missing child with almost no forensic evidence and almost no reliable witnesses. Some cases begin with chaos, a violent crime scene, obvious signs of struggle, or multiple eyewitnesses. Amber's case offered none of those things. Instead, it presented investigators with silence. Silence from surveillance cameras. Silence from physical evidence. Silence from the person who had taken her. And sometimes silence is the hardest clue of all. Amber was only 14 years old, a freshman in high school with dreams that stretched far beyond the walls of her classroom. She loved animals, enjoyed reading, and had a growing interest in animal behavior. Friends and family remembered her as responsible and dependable, qualities that made her disappearance even more alarming. She was not known for running away or disappearing without explanation. Those who knew her believed that if Amber failed to come home, something had gone terribly wrong. The date itself carried no obvious warning. February 13th fell just one day before Valentine's Day. Stores displayed pink decorations and heart-shaped candy boxes. Schools prepared for holiday activities. For most teenagers, it was simply another Friday before a long weekend. For Amber, however, it was a day she had quietly looked forward to for another reason. She carried with her a $200 check intended to purchase a sheep for her school's agricultural education program. It reflected one of her interests outside the classroom and hinted at the future she hoped to build. That check would later become one of the many heartbreaking reminders of a future interrupted. It was never used. At first, nothing about the morning appeared unusual. Amber left home and began walking toward school. The trip usually took around 15 minutes. Witnesses later reported seeing her along portions of her normal route. She was dressed like any other student heading to class, carrying the belongings she would need for an ordinary school day. But ordinary mornings can change in moments. Investigators would later learn that one witness believed she saw Amber walking with an unidentified adult man only a short distance from the school campus. At the time, there was nothing dramatic about the observation. Teenagers often walked alongside adults without attracting attention. It did not immediately suggest danger. Only later would that memory take on extraordinary significance. When Amber failed to arrive home that afternoon, concerns spread quickly through her family. Phone calls produced no answers. Friends had not heard from her. School records raised troubling questions. Surveillance footage did not clearly show Amber entering campus that morning. The realization came slowly, then all at once. She had vanished somewhere between home and school. The distance separating those two locations measured only minutes. Yet within those few minutes lay a mystery that would consume investigators for more than a year. Missing person cases often depend upon time. Detectives frequently describe the first hours as critical because memories remain fresh, surveillance footage may still exist, and physical evidence has not yet disappeared. Amber's family understood none of the technical details in those first moments. What they knew was simpler and far more painful. Their daughter was missing. As the investigation expanded, hundreds of volunteers joined professional search teams. Complete strangers devoted weekends to walking through brush-covered hillsides beneath the California sun. Searchers pushed through dense vegetation, scanned dry riverbeds, and climbed rocky terrain hoping for any clue, no matter how small. Every search ended the same way. Nothing. No backpack. No clothing. No discarded belongings. No confirmed evidence explaining where Amber had gone. The absence of answers became its own burden. Rumors inevitably followed. Some speculated that Amber had chosen to leave voluntarily despite the lack of evidence supporting such claims. Others wondered whether she had been abducted by someone she knew. Detectives explored every possibility because responsible investigations require examining all reasonable scenarios, even those that later prove incorrect. Months passed. Season after season, Amber's family continued speaking publicly, encouraging people to remember her face and share information. Community members organized additional searches. Local media periodically revisited the story, hoping renewed attention would generate fresh leads. Each tip raised expectations. Most led nowhere. Investigators reviewed registered sex offenders living near Escondido, including a man named John Albert Gardner III. Years earlier, Gardner had been convicted of sexually assaulting a 13-year-old girl. After serving his sentence, he had returned to the community under legal supervision. His name appeared in records. But records alone were not enough. There was no forensic evidence connecting him to Amber's disappearance. Detectives could not build a criminal case on suspicion, reputation, or proximity alone. Without evidence, Gardner remained one name among many considered during the investigation. The case slowly entered a painful stage familiar to families of missing persons. Life continued around them while time seemed frozen inside their own home. Birthdays arrived. Holidays came and went. School semesters ended. The seasons changed. But Amber did not come home. Every knock on the door carried the possibility of news. Every ringing telephone inspired a brief surge of hope before disappointment returned. For families of the missing, uncertainty often becomes its own form of grief because there's no clear ending, only endless questions. What happened? Where is she? Is she still alive? Those questions remained unanswered throughout 2009. Then, just over a year after Amber disappeared, another young woman vanished only miles away. Her disappearance would trigger an investigation moving with remarkable speed. Detectives would uncover forensic evidence unavailable in Amber's case. That evidence would lead them to the same registered sex offender whose name had once appeared on an earlier list without sufficient proof. What investigators discovered next would finally expose the truth behind one of California's most haunting missing child cases. But by then, the answer would come far too late for Amber Duboce. Long before Amber Duboce's name appeared on missing person posters across Southern California, Escondido was known as a quiet suburban city where families settled for stability rather than excitement. Located about 30 miles northeast of downtown San Diego, the city sat between rolling hills, residential neighborhoods, and stretches of open land that gave it a distinctly different character from the crowded beaches and busy freeways often associated with Southern California. In early 2009, Escondido was home to people from many different backgrounds. New housing developments stood beside older neighborhoods that had existed for decades. Children rode bicycles through cul-de-sacs after school. Local parks filled with families on weekends, while nearby hiking trails attracted runners, cyclists, and outdoor enthusiasts throughout the year. For many residents, it felt like the kind of place where people still recognized familiar faces. Parents greeted one another during school drop-offs. Neighbors waved while collecting their mail. Teachers often knew students by name rather than by classroom number. It was not a city without crime. Like every growing community, Escondido experienced thefts, assaults, and occasional violent incidents. Yet crimes involving the disappearance of a child were exceptionally rare. Most parents believed their children could safely walk to school, especially during the busy morning hours when streets were filled with commuters and other students. That belief had been built over years. It would be shattered in a single morning. Amber Duboce was a freshman at Escondido High School. At 14 years old, she was entering a stage of life filled with new responsibilities and growing independence. Like many teenagers, she was beginning to make decisions for herself while still relying heavily on the routines established by her family. Those routines mattered. Every weekday followed a familiar rhythm. Wake up. Get ready for school. Gather homework and books. Leave the house. Walk the same route. Arrive before classes began. There was comfort in repetition because repetition suggested safety. Amber's family later described her as dependable and responsible. She was not known for disappearing without explanation or ignoring her family's expectations. If she said she was going to school, she went to school. If plans changed, she let someone know. That consistency became one of the first reasons investigators believed her disappearance was likely the result of criminal activity rather than a voluntary decision. Outside the classroom, Amber had interests that reflected both curiosity and patience. She loved animals. Friends and relatives remembered her fascination with wildlife and her dream of studying animal behavior someday. While many teenagers frequently changed career ambitions, Amber's interest in animals had remained remarkably consistent. She enjoyed learning about them, reading about them, and imagining a future built around understanding their behavior. That dream connected naturally with one of the programs offered through her school. Agricultural education was an important part of student life for many teenagers in the area. Students learned practical skills involving livestock, farming, and animal care. The experience provided opportunities to develop responsibility while participating in projects that extended far beyond ordinary classroom lessons. Amber looked forward to taking part. On the morning she disappeared, she carried something that appeared completely ordinary at the time but would later become one of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence in the investigation. A check for $200. Its purpose was simple. She intended to purchase a sheep for the school's agricultural program. There was nothing mysterious about the check. Nothing suspicious. It represented planning, responsibility, and anticipation for something she hoped to accomplish in the near future. After her disappearance, investigators confirmed that the check had never been used. That small financial detail quietly reinforced what detectives already suspected. Amber had never reached the point in her day where she could carry out the plans she had made. For her family, the unused check became more than financial evidence. It became a symbol of interrupted possibilities. Every teenager carries invisible expectations into the future. Weekend plans. Upcoming birthdays. School projects. Dreams about adulthood. Amber's future had been filled with those ordinary expectations. She expected to finish school. She expected to continue learning about animals. She expected to return home that afternoon. None of those expectations hinted at danger. Meanwhile, life throughout Escondido continued as usual. Businesses opened their doors. Traffic slowly increased as commuters headed toward San Diego and neighboring communities. Coffee shops served regular customers. School buses followed familiar routes. Students walked along sidewalks in small groups, talking about homework, sports, music, and weekend plans. Among hundreds of teenagers making their way toward school that morning, Amber did not appear different from anyone else. She blended naturally into the rhythm of everyday life. That normality would later become one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. Investigators often emphasize that predators searching for vulnerable victims usually rely upon ordinary environments. They do not necessarily wait in dark alleys or isolated forests. Instead, they take advantage of brief moments when routine creates a false sense of security. In Amber's case, the route between home and school represented exactly that kind of routine. It was familiar. Predictable. Repeated almost every weekday. Many students followed similar paths. The distance was short enough that walking seemed completely reasonable. No one expected those few minutes to become the focus of a year-long homicide investigation. Years later, investigators would reconstruct every possible movement along that route. They reviewed witness statements, traffic patterns, nearby businesses, potential surveillance footage. Every available detail became important because the window during which Amber disappeared appeared incredibly small. Somewhere between leaving home and arriving at school, something interrupted an otherwise ordinary morning. Exactly where that interruption occurred would remain one of the central questions throughout the investigation. One witness later reported seeing Amber walking with an adult man not far from campus. The observation did not immediately raise alarm because nothing about the encounter appeared openly violent. People pass one another on sidewalks every day. Teenagers sometimes walk beside adults they know. Without obvious signs of distress, there was little reason for anyone nearby to assume a crime was unfolding. Only after Amber failed to arrive home did that brief observation acquire enormous significance. Human memory is often imperfect. Investigators understand that witnesses rarely remember every detail with complete accuracy, particularly when they have no reason to pay close attention at the time. Detectives carefully compared statements, looking for consistency while acknowledging the limitations of recollection. Every remembered face. Every parked vehicle. Every unusual sound. Every passing conversation. Each possibility had to be examined. At the same time, investigators began learning more about the broader environment surrounding Amber's disappearance. One uncomfortable reality soon emerged. Although Escondido was generally considered safe, registered sex offenders lived throughout the region, as required by California law. Among them was John Albert Gardner III. Nearly a decade earlier, Gardner had committed a violent sexual assault against a 13-year-old girl. His conviction resulted in imprisonment and mandatory registration as a sex offender after his release. His presence in the community was not secret. His name appeared in public records. Families concerned about neighborhood safety could find that information. In fact, Amber's own family would later acknowledge that they had seen Gardner's name while reviewing local offender registries after she disappeared. But knowing someone has a criminal history is very different from proving involvement in a specific crime. The justice system requires evidence. Not assumptions. Not fear. Not coincidence. At that stage of the investigation, detectives possessed no forensic evidence connecting Gardner to Amber's disappearance. No DNA. No eyewitness identification placing him with certainty alongside Amber. No confession. No recovered physical evidence. Without those elements, investigators could not simply arrest someone based on prior convictions. The investigation therefore continued in multiple directions simultaneously. Detectives explored whether Amber could have accepted a ride from someone she knew. They examined the possibility of an opportunistic stranger abduction. They considered accidental injury, voluntary disappearance, and numerous other scenarios. Each theory demanded time. Each required resources. Each ultimately failed to produce definitive answers. As winter slowly gave way to spring, the optimism that often accompanies the earliest stages of a missing person investigation became increasingly difficult to maintain. Searches continued. Volunteers returned again and again. Hope persisted. But hope was no substitute for evidence. The city that had once been defined by ordinary routines gradually became united by uncertainty. Parents talked quietly while waiting outside schools. Teachers reassured anxious students. Local news broadcasts regularly reminded viewers that Amber was still missing. Her photograph became familiar throughout the region. The smiling face printed on thousands of flyers represented more than one missing teenager. It represented a question no one could answer. How could a 14-year-old girl disappear during a 15-minute walk to school without leaving behind a clear trace? For more than a year, that question remained unanswered. And while investigators continued searching for Amber, another tragedy was already approaching, one that would ultimately expose the man responsible and unravel the mystery that had haunted Escondido since that quiet February morning. As winter slowly faded into the mild spring that Southern California is known for, daily life in Escondido continued almost unchanged on the surface. Cars still lined the parking lots outside supermarkets. Students hurried between classes as final exams approached. Little league games filled local parks during the evenings, and families gathered for weekend barbecues beneath clear blue skies. Yet beneath that appearance of normalcy, something had shifted. Amber Duboce's disappearance had quietly altered the way people looked at their own community. Parents who had once encouraged independence began insisting on driving their children to school. Teenagers who had walked alone started traveling in groups whenever possible. Conversations that once revolved around homework or weekend plans increasingly turned toward safety, strangers, and the unsettling realization that even familiar neighborhoods could hide unknown dangers. Fear did not arrive all at once. It settled gradually, almost invisibly, becoming part of everyday life. The city itself offered countless contrasts. Busy commercial streets eventually gave way to quiet residential neighborhoods. Beyond those neighborhoods lay open spaces, hiking trails, dry creek beds, and stretches of undeveloped land that reflected Southern California's rugged landscape. During the day, these areas attracted runners, cyclists, hikers, and families enjoying the outdoors. At sunrise or sunset, however, some of those same places could feel remarkably isolated despite being only a short drive from densely populated neighborhoods. This mixture of suburban development and natural terrain would later become significant during the investigation. Search teams faced an enormous challenge. The possible search area extended far beyond the streets Amber had walked that morning. If she had been abducted by vehicle, investigators had to consider locations many miles away from Escondido itself. Every canyon, park, trail, and isolated road represented another place that required attention. For volunteers, each search carried the same hope. Perhaps today would be different. Perhaps someone had overlooked an important clue. Perhaps the next hillside, the next wooded area, or the next abandoned path would finally provide answers. Most returned home exhausted and disappointed. Professional search and rescue personnel worked alongside ordinary citizens who simply refused to believe that a child could disappear without a trace. They endured long hours under the California sun, navigating difficult terrain with careful attention to detail. Every discarded piece of clothing demanded examination. Every footprint required documentation. Every reported sighting had to be evaluated. Most proved unrelated. The emotional burden of those searches extended beyond physical exhaustion. Volunteers often described the strange combination of hope and dread that accompanied each new day. Everyone wanted to find Amber alive. At the same time, they understood that as days turned into weeks, the likelihood of that outcome steadily decreased. For Amber's family, however, giving up was never an option. Each morning began with the same unanswered question. Could today finally bring news? Hope became part of their routine. So did disappointment. Investigators, meanwhile, faced another difficult obstacle that frequently complicates missing person cases: the passage of time. Memories fade. Surveillance footage is routinely erased. Potential witnesses relocate or forget details they initially considered insignificant. Evidence exposed to weather gradually disappears. Time rarely favors investigators. Every day without progress narrowed the opportunities to recover reliable information. Detectives interviewed classmates, teachers, neighbors, relatives, and complete strangers who believed they might have seen Amber somewhere after her disappearance. Some tips appeared promising at first. A possible sighting in another city. An unidentified vehicle seen near the school. Someone matching Amber's description reported at a shopping center. Each lead generated renewed optimism. Each required careful investigation. Again and again, those hopes dissolved after closer examination. The frustration grew not because detectives lacked determination, but because they lacked something far more important: evidence. Modern criminal investigations often rely heavily on forensic science. DNA. Digital records. Cell phone data. Surveillance video. Financial transactions. In Amber's case, remarkably little of that evidence existed. She had simply been walking to school. There was no known phone conversation during those final moments. No confirmed electronic trail revealing what happened next. No crime scene that investigators could immediately secure and analyze. The absence of forensic evidence forced detectives to rely heavily on traditional investigative work. Interviewing witnesses. Reconstructing timelines. Reviewing offender databases. Following anonymous tips. Re-examining every statement for inconsistencies. It was painstaking work requiring patience rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Public attention also presented unique challenges. Initially, Amber's disappearance generated widespread concern throughout the region. News organizations covered search efforts extensively. Community members organized vigils. Volunteers distributed thousands of missing person flyers. But as weeks passed without significant developments, media coverage naturally declined. New events replaced old headlines. Other stories captured public attention. This gradual shift is common in long-term missing person investigations, yet it can be devastating for families who continue living the same nightmare every day. Amber's loved ones refused to let her be forgotten. They attended community events. They spoke with reporters. They encouraged anyone with information to contact investigators. Their determination reflected a painful reality shared by many families of missing persons. If they stopped searching, who would continue? Throughout 2009, detectives repeatedly reviewed information concerning registered sex offenders living within the broader region. Among those names remained John Albert Gardner III. His criminal history was deeply troubling. Years earlier, he had committed a violent sexual assault against a 13-year-old girl, a crime that demonstrated his willingness to target vulnerable young victims. After serving his prison sentence, Gardner returned to the community under California's sex offender registration requirements. His presence was known. His address was documented. His past crimes were part of the public record. Yet criminal history alone could not justify criminal charges in Amber's disappearance. Investigators needed direct evidence linking him to the case. Without it, they could not move forward. Looking back today, it is tempting to assume that the answer should have been obvious. History often creates that illusion. Once investigators know the identity of an offender, earlier events can appear connected in ways that were not apparent at the time. But investigations unfold in real time. Detectives in 2009 did not possess the knowledge available today. They could not simply skip ahead to the conclusion. Every decision had to be supported by facts that could withstand legal scrutiny. That distinction is essential to understanding why Amber's case remained unsolved for so long. The investigation was not abandoned. It was stalled. There is an important difference. Law enforcement agencies continued receiving tips. Files remained active. Evidence was periodically re-examined. Searches resumed whenever new information emerged. Even so, months gradually accumulated without the breakthrough everyone desperately hoped for. As summer arrived, then autumn, and finally winter once again, the calendar became an increasingly painful reminder. Birthdays passed. School semesters ended. Another holiday season came and went. Amber's bedroom remained largely unchanged. For families enduring long-term disappearances, preserving familiar spaces often becomes a way of preserving hope. A backpack left where it was last placed. Favorite books still resting on a shelf. Photographs continuing to smile from family walls. These ordinary objects slowly transform into powerful reminders of absence. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond the public eye, the individual responsible for Amber's disappearance remained free. No one outside the investigation knew who that person was. No one could predict that within weeks another young woman would disappear under circumstances that would shock California once again. That second tragedy would unfold near Lake Hodges. Unlike Amber's case, investigators would quickly recover crucial forensic evidence. That evidence would identify a suspect. And once detectives focused their attention on him, they began recognizing disturbing similarities between the new investigation and the unanswered questions surrounding Amber Duboce. The mystery that had haunted Escondido for more than a year was approaching its turning point. Not because new evidence had suddenly appeared in Amber's case, but because another crime would reveal the identity of the man who had remained hidden in plain sight all along. The truth was closer than anyone realized. It had simply taken another devastating loss before investigators finally had the evidence needed to uncover it. Before Amber Duboce became the subject of one of California's most widely known missing person investigations, she was simply a 14-year-old girl living an ordinary life. To the people who knew her, she was not a headline or a photograph on a missing person poster. She was a daughter, a classmate, a friend, and a teenager standing at the beginning of a future that seemed full of possibilities. Understanding Amber's story means looking beyond the crime itself. Like many young teenagers, she was navigating the transition between childhood and adulthood. She had entered high school only months before her disappearance, a period that often brings new friendships, greater independence, and the excitement of imagining what life might become after graduation. Those who knew Amber consistently described her as responsible and dependable. Public statements made by her family emphasized that she was the kind of teenager who followed routines, respected rules, and maintained close relationships with the people around her. Investigators found no evidence suggesting that she had planned to run away or leave home voluntarily. That distinction would become important from the earliest hours of the investigation. Missing person cases involving teenagers often require detectives to consider a wide range of possibilities, including the chance that the individual left by choice. In Amber's case, however, the facts pointed in a different direction. Her family reported that nothing about her recent behavior suggested she intended to disappear. She had made plans for school, maintained her normal schedule, and left home expecting to return later that day. Everything about her actions reflected an ordinary Friday morning. Amber attended Escondido High School as a freshman. Like countless students beginning high school, she was adapting to a larger campus, more demanding classes, and the increased responsibility that came with growing older. It was a time when many teenagers begin thinking more seriously about their interests and future careers. For Amber, those interests often centered on animals. Family members recalled that she genuinely enjoyed learning about them and hoped to pursue a career involving animal behavior. Rather than being a passing childhood fascination, her interest appeared to be developing into a long-term goal. She enjoyed reading and learning, and people close to her remembered a quiet curiosity about the natural world. That interest connected naturally with one of the opportunities available through her school. Escondido High School offered an agricultural education program that allowed students to gain practical experience caring for livestock. Such programs are common in many California communities and teach responsibility alongside technical skills. Students often raise animals as part of supervised educational projects, learning about nutrition, health, and animal husbandry while developing discipline and commitment. Amber looked forward to participating. On the morning she disappeared, she carried a check for $200 intended to purchase a sheep for that program. The detail may seem small compared with the larger investigation, yet it revealed something meaningful about her state of mind. She was planning ahead. She expected to continue her education. She expected to return home. The check was never used. As investigators reconstructed the timeline, that unused check quietly became another indication that Amber's plans had been interrupted unexpectedly. Family photographs released during the investigation show a smiling teenager whose appearance reflected countless other young people her age. There was nothing extraordinary about those photographs in the traditional sense. That was precisely what made them so powerful. Amber represented normal life. She was not famous. She was not involved in dangerous activities. She was simply a student walking to school. Her disappearance challenged the comforting belief that ordinary routines naturally provide safety. People who knew Amber often remembered her as someone who cared deeply about animals and enjoyed spending time learning about them. Those memories became part of the public portrait presented during the search efforts, reminding the community that investigators were not searching for a case file but for a young girl with dreams, interests, and people who loved her. As media coverage expanded throughout Southern California, Amber's photograph appeared on thousands of flyers distributed by volunteers. Her family participated in press conferences and community events, asking the public to remember that behind every news report was a daughter whose absence was felt every hour of every day. Families of missing children frequently describe life after a disappearance as existing in two different worlds simultaneously. Outside the home, the world continues moving forward. Schools remain open. Businesses operate as usual. Neighbors go to work. Inside the family, however, time often feels suspended. Every unanswered phone call. Every unfamiliar vehicle driving slowly through the neighborhood. Every unexpected knock on the front door can briefly reignite hope before reality returns. Amber's disappearance transformed ordinary moments into painful reminders of uncertainty. Investigators later confirmed that she had left home carrying everything necessary for a normal school day. There was no indication that she packed extra clothing, withdrew money, or made preparations suggesting a planned departure. Her actions reflected confidence that she would return later that afternoon. That expectation was shared by everyone around her. Nothing about February 13, 2009, appeared unusual before she left home. There had been no public reports of threats directed toward Amber. No known disputes that suggested immediate danger. No evidence that she anticipated encountering violence during her short walk to school. From an investigative standpoint, these details were significant because they narrowed the range of plausible explanations. Detectives increasingly focused on the possibility that Amber had become the victim of an opportunistic crime rather than one involving prior planning on her part. As the search continued, classmates, teachers, and community members contributed to efforts aimed at keeping Amber's case in the public eye. Volunteers organized searches, distributed flyers, and encouraged anyone with information to contact law enforcement. These efforts reflected more than community concern. They reflected the belief that Amber deserved to be found. For investigators, learning about Amber's personality and daily habits served another important purpose. Establishing a victim's routine often helps identify deviations that may explain how a crime occurred. Detectives carefully reconstructed her schedule, her usual walking route, and her expected arrival time at school. Every minute mattered. The timeline indicated that Amber had only a brief window during which she disappeared. Witnesses observed her walking toward school, yet school surveillance footage did not confirm her arrival on campus. Somewhere between those 2 points, the normal rhythm of her day came to an abrupt and tragic end. Looking back, it is tempting to view Amber's story only through the lens of what happened afterward. But before the investigation, before the searches, and before her name became known across California, she was simply living the life of a 14-year-old girl with ordinary hopes for the future. She had school assignments to complete, interests she wanted to pursue, goals that were only beginning to take shape. Those ordinary details remain essential to understanding the case because they remind us that the investigation was never solely about solving a crime. It was about finding answers for a family whose daughter had vanished during what should have been one of the most routine parts of her day. In the months that followed, detectives would devote thousands of hours to reconstructing Amber's final known movements. Witness statements would be reviewed repeatedly. Evidence would be re-examined. Leads would be pursued across Southern California. Yet throughout that lengthy investigation, one fact never changed. Amber Duboce was not defined by the circumstances of her death. She was remembered first as a young student, an animal lover, and a daughter whose future was taken before she had the opportunity to discover where it might have led. The investigation into Amber Duboce's disappearance would eventually become a story about evidence, suspects, and a search for justice. But before the investigation reached those stages, there was another story that mattered just as much, the story of who Amber was before the world knew her name. For her family, remembering Amber meant looking beyond the final morning of her life. It meant remembering the years before February 13, 2009, when she was simply a young girl growing up, developing interests, forming friendships, and discovering the person she wanted to become. Like many teenagers her age, Amber was experiencing the complicated transition between dependence and independence. High school represented a new chapter. It was a time when young people begin to define themselves more clearly, discovering what subjects interest them, what activities bring them happiness, and what dreams they might pursue in adulthood. For Amber, animals were a major part of that identity. Her interest in animals was not simply a hobby. Those close to her described it as a genuine passion. She was fascinated by the way animals behaved, how they interacted with their environments, and how humans could better understand them. That curiosity reflected a thoughtful side of her personality. Rather than simply wanting to own animals as pets, Amber wanted to understand them. She was interested in the science behind behavior and hoped that knowledge could eventually become part of her future. That ambition was still developing, but it already showed something important about her character. She was a young person who looked beyond the present moment. She imagined possibilities. She made plans. She believed there was a future waiting for her. Her involvement in the school's agricultural program represented that connection between curiosity and responsibility. Programs involving livestock require commitment. Students must learn that caring for animals is not just about interest or affection, it requires consistency, patience, and attention every day. Those qualities were reflected in the way people described Amber. She was not known as someone who avoided responsibility. She was not someone who acted without considering consequences. Instead, those around her saw a teenager who understood expectations and took them seriously. This became a crucial part of the investigation after she disappeared. When detectives investigate a missing teenager, one of the first questions they must answer is whether the person may have left voluntarily. Teenagers sometimes leave home because of conflicts, emotional struggles, or personal decisions that others may not understand. Investigators examined that possibility in Amber's case. They looked at her relationships. They considered her behavior before February 13th. They reviewed whether there were signs that she had planned to leave. The evidence did not support that theory. Her normal routine remained one of the strongest indicators that something unexpected had happened. On the morning she disappeared, Amber was not preparing for a new life somewhere else. She was preparing for a normal school day. The check she carried for the agricultural program demonstrated that she was thinking about the immediate future. She had a purpose for leaving home. She had somewhere to be. She had responsibilities waiting for her. The tragedy of the case is partly found in that ordinary expectation. Amber did not leave home believing she was walking into danger. She left believing she would return. That belief was shared by her family. When hours passed without contact, concern quickly replaced routine. For parents, the first moments after a child fails to come home can be filled with conflicting emotions. At first, there may be reasonable explanations. Perhaps the phone battery died. Perhaps she stopped somewhere with friends. Perhaps plans changed. But as time passes and those explanations disappear one by one, fear begins to take over. In Amber's case, the concern became immediate because her absence was so unlike her. She was not known for ignoring calls. She was not known for disappearing. She was not known for making decisions that would leave her family without information. The simplest explanation became the most frightening one. Something had happened. As news of Amber's disappearance spread, the community began learning about the person behind the photograph. Search efforts were not only attempts to solve a mystery, they were efforts to bring home someone people believed they understood. Volunteers who had never met Amber carried her picture through neighborhoods. Strangers shared information online. Community members attended events calling for answers. Many became connected to the case because they saw their own children reflected in her story. A teenager walking to school. A student carrying books. A young person with plans for the future. The circumstances were frightening because they seemed possible. Amber's disappearance also highlighted a painful reality faced by families of missing children. The uncertainty can be overwhelming. When a person is found quickly, families receive answers. When a person remains missing, every possibility remains open. Hope and fear exist together. Families may hope for a safe return while investigators must consider increasingly difficult possibilities. This emotional conflict became a defining part of the months following Amber's disappearance. Her family continued searching while also facing the possibility that the investigation might not end the way everyone hoped. Throughout 2009, Amber's image remained visible across Escondido and surrounding communities. Her photograph became a reminder that behind every missing person case is an individual life. Not just statistics. Not just a police file. Not just an investigation. A person. Amber was 14 years old. She had favorite interests. She had educational goals. She had people who cared about her. She had a future that had not yet been written. The passage of time did not erase those details. If anything, it made them more important. As investigators continued working, they attempted to understand not only where Amber had gone, but who she was. Victimology, the process of studying a victim's background, routines, relationships, and habits, is an essential part of many criminal investigations. Understanding the victim can reveal opportunities. It can identify patterns. It can help investigators determine whether the victim was targeted or encountered a random threat. In Amber's case, that process reinforced a disturbing conclusion. She appeared to have been living a normal life. There was no evidence that she had knowingly placed herself in danger. No evidence that she had arranged to meet someone. No evidence that she intended to disappear. The more investigators learned about Amber, the clearer it became that her disappearance was not the result of choices she had made. Something had happened to her. Someone had interrupted the life of a young girl who was simply following her usual routine. That realization made the search even more urgent. Every missing day represented another lost opportunity to find answers. Every unanswered question represented another burden carried by her family. More than a year would pass before investigators finally discovered what had happened. During that time, Amber's name remained connected to hope. People continued searching. Her family continued waiting. The community continued asking questions. But eventually, the investigation would enter a new phase, one where the focus would shift from finding a missing teenager to uncovering the actions of the person responsible. That turning point would come after another young woman disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. And when investigators began examining the evidence from that new case, they would finally discover the connection that would bring answers to the mystery of Amber Duboce. February 13, 2009, began like many other school mornings in Escondido, California. There was no warning that the day would become a turning point in the lives of so many people. No public disturbance. No emergency. No obvious sign that something terrible was about to happen. For Amber Duboce, it was supposed to be a normal Friday. She woke up as she had on countless school days before. She prepared for classes, gathered what she needed, and followed the familiar routine that had become part of her everyday life. At 14 years old, walking to school was not unusual for Amber. It was a route she knew, a path connected to the predictable rhythm of teenage life. The distance was short. The destination was familiar. The morning appeared ordinary. Yet somewhere along that brief journey, Amber disappeared. The exact sequence of events remains one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Investigators were able to establish parts of her timeline through witness accounts and available information, but the precise moment when her life changed forever remained hidden for more than a year. What is known is that Amber left home carrying items connected to her plans for that day. Among those belongings was the $200 check intended for the purchase of a sheep through her school's agricultural program. It was a small detail, but one that later became deeply significant. It showed that Amber was not leaving home with the intention of disappearing. She was carrying something related to a normal school activity and a future plan she expected to continue. She was going to school. She was thinking about classes. She was thinking about the agricultural project she cared about. She was thinking about an ordinary day. Shortly after leaving home, Amber began walking toward Escondido High School. The morning streets contained the usual movement of a weekday. Vehicles traveled through nearby roads. Students made their way toward classrooms. Residents began their daily routines. In such an environment, nothing immediately suggested danger. This was one of the reasons the case became so difficult to understand. Amber did not disappear from an isolated location. She did not vanish during the middle of the night. She disappeared while moving through a familiar area during a time when other people were awake and active. The first known pieces of information came from witnesses who later helped investigators reconstruct her final confirmed movements. Several people reported seeing Amber walking along her usual route. Those observations placed her in the area between home and school. One witness later reported seeing Amber walking with an adult male near the school campus. At the time, there was no clear indication that anything unusual was occurring. The encounter did not immediately stand out as suspicious. That detail became important only after Amber failed to arrive home. Human beings often recognize danger only after they know danger existed. A person passing another person on the street may not remember the interaction at all unless something later gives that moment importance. For investigators, however, even brief observations can become critical pieces of a larger timeline. Who was present? Where were they standing? What direction were they moving? How much time passed? Each question became part of the effort to understand Amber's final known moments. When Amber did not return home that afternoon, concern quickly grew. At first, families naturally search for ordinary explanations. Maybe she stopped somewhere. Maybe she was visiting a friend. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. But as time passed, those possibilities became harder to accept. Amber had responsibilities. She had routines. She had people who expected her home. Her absence was not normal behavior. The situation changed from concern to alarm. Her family contacted authorities, beginning a search that would eventually involve thousands of people and attract national attention. Investigators immediately faced one of the most challenging situations in law enforcement: a missing child with no confirmed location. In many criminal cases, the first hours provide important opportunities. A crime scene may still contain evidence. Witnesses may remember details clearly. Electronic records may reveal movements. But Amber's disappearance presented a different problem. There was no obvious crime scene. There was no recovered property. There was no immediate suspect. There was only a missing 14-year-old girl and a timeline measured in minutes. Detectives began working to reconstruct those final moments. They examined Amber's route. They interviewed people who may have seen her. They reviewed available surveillance information. They searched the surrounding area. The question at the center of everything was simple. Where did Amber go? The school became an important focus. Because Amber was expected to arrive there, investigators needed to determine whether she had reached campus or disappeared before getting there. Available information indicated that she was not captured entering the school grounds. That meant the critical window was likely somewhere before her expected arrival. A short walk suddenly became the center of a major investigation. Every possibility had to be considered. Investigators could not assume they knew what had happened. They examined whether Amber might have left voluntarily. They considered whether she had suffered an accident. They explored whether she had encountered someone who caused her harm. Each possibility required investigation. However, as more information emerged, the voluntary disappearance theory became increasingly difficult to support. Amber had left behind no clear indication that she planned to leave. Her behavior before that morning showed no obvious preparation for running away. Her personal belongings and plans suggested she expected to continue her normal life. The investigation increasingly focused on the possibility that Amber had encountered danger during her walk. Meanwhile, her family faced the unbearable uncertainty that comes with a missing child case. They did not know where she was. They did not know who might have taken her. They did not know whether she was still alive. Every passing hour created more questions. The search began immediately. Law enforcement agencies coordinated efforts involving officers, search teams, and volunteers. Areas around Escondido were examined carefully. Roads, trails, open spaces, and locations where evidence might potentially be found were searched. The community responded with urgency. People who had never met Amber joined the effort because they understood the importance of finding a missing child quickly. They distributed flyers. They shared information. They searched areas they had never considered before. The image of Amber became familiar throughout the region. A smiling 14-year-old girl whose disappearance had transformed an ordinary Friday morning into a mystery that demanded answers. But as the first days passed, investigators encountered the reality that makes missing person cases so difficult. The absence of evidence can become its own obstacle. Every search that produced nothing created another unanswered question. Every interview that revealed no new information increased the uncertainty. And behind every investigative decision was the same urgent concern. The longer Amber remained missing, the harder it might become to find her. The investigation had begun. But the truth about what happened during those final minutes of Amber's walk to school would remain hidden for more than a year. At that moment, no one yet knew that the person responsible had already left behind a pattern of violence. No one knew that a name already familiar to authorities would eventually become central to the case. No one knew that solving Amber's disappearance would require another tragedy before the evidence finally emerged. For now, there was only a missing teenager, a desperate search, and a community waiting for answers. In the days immediately following Amber Duboce's disappearance, investigators faced one of the most difficult tasks in any missing person case: reconstructing a moment that no one fully witnessed. They knew when Amber left home. They knew where she was expected to go. They knew she never arrived at school. But the space between those facts remained unknown. That small gap in time became the center of the investigation. A few minutes. A few streets. A few possible decisions made by someone whose identity was still unknown. For investigators, those final confirmed movements were not simply a timeline. They represented the last opportunity to understand what happened before Amber disappeared. Every detail mattered. The clothes she wore. The items she carried. The route she followed. The people who may have seen her. The vehicles that may have been nearby. The investigation became an effort to rebuild an ordinary morning and identify the exact moment when it stopped being ordinary. One of the most important challenges was determining whether Amber had willingly changed her plans or whether someone had forced a change upon her. Those questions are central in nearly every missing child investigation. Did the person leave voluntarily? Did they meet someone they knew? Did they encounter a stranger? Was there an accident? Or was a crime committed? In Amber's case, investigators found no evidence that she intended to leave home or avoid returning. Her actions before that morning showed consistency with her normal routine. She had school obligations, a project she was excited about, and no known reason to abandon the life she was living. The circumstances suggested that something unexpected happened after she left home. The possibility of an abduction became increasingly concerning. Investigators began examining the environment surrounding Amber's route. Escondido High School and the surrounding streets became areas of intense attention. Detectives spoke with residents, reviewed available information, and attempted to identify anyone who may have noticed something unusual that morning. The difficulty was that nothing about the situation initially appeared unusual. A teenager walking to school is not an event most people remember. A vehicle driving down a street is not automatically suspicious. A person standing nearby may seem completely ordinary. Only after a disappearance occurs do those ordinary details become important. This created a challenge for investigators. They were asking people to remember moments that, at the time, appeared meaningless. A passerby might not remember a face seen for only a few seconds. A driver might not remember a vehicle encountered during a normal commute. A resident might not recall a person walking along a familiar road. Yet among those forgotten details could be the information needed to solve the case. As the investigation expanded, authorities began receiving tips from members of the public. Some people reported possible sightings. Others shared theories. Some offered information about individuals they believed should be investigated. Every tip had to be treated seriously. At the same time, every tip had to be carefully verified. Missing person investigations often attract large numbers of reports, especially when the case receives public attention. While many come from people genuinely trying to help, some are based on misunderstandings, incorrect memories, or speculation. Detectives had to separate useful information from noise. The search itself became a massive community effort. Law enforcement officers were joined by volunteers who searched areas throughout the region. Teams examined parks, open spaces, and locations that appeared connected to Amber's possible movements. Searchers walked through difficult terrain. They followed trails. They checked areas that might otherwise have been overlooked. The work was physically demanding, but the emotional challenge was even greater. Everyone involved wanted the same outcome. They wanted to find Amber alive. They wanted to return her home. But as each day passed without answers, the investigation moved into a more uncertain stage. The early urgency of a missing person case began competing with a painful reality, the passage of time. Investigators understood that every missing hour could make finding evidence more difficult. Potential witnesses could forget details. Physical evidence could disappear. The person responsible, if a crime had occurred, could have more time to hide their actions. Despite those challenges, investigators continued following every available lead. One area of focus involved reviewing individuals in the region with histories that might indicate a risk to children. This process included examining registered sex offenders. Among those names was John Albert Gardner III. Gardner was not an unknown figure to authorities. Years earlier, he had been convicted of a serious sexual offense involving a 13-year-old girl. After serving his sentence, he returned to the community and was required to register as a sex offender. His criminal history was documented. His information was available through official records. However, during the early stages of Amber's disappearance, investigators did not have evidence connecting him to the case. This distinction is important. A person can have a troubling past without being responsible for every crime that occurs nearby. Investigators could not arrest Gardner based solely on his previous conviction or his location. They needed evidence. A connection. Something that could place him with Amber or link him directly to her disappearance. At that point, they did not have it. The case continued without a clear answer. Months passed. The initial wave of media attention gradually decreased. The number of daily searches became smaller. The public moved on to other stories. But for Amber's family, there was no moving on. The calendar continued forward, but their lives remained connected to one question. Where was Amber? They continued advocating for her. They continued speaking publicly. They continued hoping that someone would provide information that could finally explain what happened. The investigation remained open. Detectives continued reviewing evidence and following leads. But without a major breakthrough, the case slowly entered a painful period of uncertainty. This period is often the most difficult stage for families of missing persons. The first days bring intense action. The first weeks bring organized searches. But the months afterward can bring silence. Silence from investigators. Silence from new information. Silence from the person responsible. For Amber's family, every holiday and milestone became another reminder of her absence. The world continued changing. But one question remained frozen in time. What happened during those few minutes between Amber leaving home and failing to reach school? More than a year would pass before investigators finally uncovered the answer. And the discovery would not come from a new witness stepping forward. It would not come from a forgotten piece of evidence suddenly being found. Instead, the breakthrough would happen because another young woman's disappearance would expose a pattern that investigators could no longer ignore. On February 25, 2010, 17-year-old Chelsea King disappeared while running near Lake Hodges. Within days, investigators would identify a suspect. That suspect would be John Albert Gardner III. And once detectives began examining Gardner more closely, the unanswered questions surrounding Amber Duboce's disappearance would finally begin to receive answers. The investigation that had stood still for more than a year was about to change forever. For more than a year, the name Amber Duboce remained connected to one painful question that investigators could not answer. Where was she? From the moment she disappeared on February 13, 2009, the case had been defined by uncertainty. Detectives had a timeline. They had witness statements. They had thousands of pages of investigative records. They had searched countless locations throughout Southern California. But they did not have the one thing that could bring the family closer to the truth. They did not have Amber. The investigation had entered a difficult stage familiar to law enforcement officers who work missing person cases. The urgency of the first days had passed, but the questions had not disappeared. The file remained active. Leads continued to be reviewed. Information continued to be collected. But there was no breakthrough. Then, in February 2010, everything changed. A second disappearance brought a sudden and devastating connection between two cases that investigators had never expected to link. On February 25, 2010, 17-year-old Chelsea King disappeared while running near Lake Hodges in the San Diego County area. Like Amber, Chelsea was a young student whose disappearance immediately raised concern throughout the community. The circumstances were alarming. She had left for a routine activity. She had not returned. Her family reported her missing. And investigators quickly recognized the need for an urgent response. Unlike Amber's case, however, the Chelsea King investigation developed rapidly. Authorities discovered evidence that pointed them toward a possible suspect. Within days, detectives focused on John Albert Gardner III, a registered sex offender living in the region. The investigation moved quickly. Evidence connected Gardner to Chelsea's disappearance, and he was arrested. For detectives who had spent more than a year searching for answers in the Amber Duboce case, the arrest created a new and troubling possibility. Could the two cases be connected? The question was not based only on coincidence. There were similarities that immediately drew attention. Both victims were teenage girls. Both disappeared in San Diego County. Both were taken during ordinary daytime activities. Both cases involved a young person vanishing from an area that appeared safe. Investigators began reviewing the evidence from Amber's case with a new perspective. This is a common practice in major criminal investigations. When authorities identify a suspect in one serious crime, they often examine whether that person may be connected to other unsolved cases. They compare timelines, methods, locations, victim profiles, and available evidence. The process requires caution. Similarities alone do not prove involvement. But patterns can reveal connections that were invisible before. As detectives looked more closely at Gardner's background, they found information that made him a person of significant interest. Gardner had a previous conviction involving the sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl in 2000. That history meant investigators had to examine whether he could have committed additional crimes after his release. The possibility was deeply disturbing. A man who had already demonstrated violent behavior toward a young victim had been living in the same general region where Amber disappeared. Now another teenage girl had become a victim under circumstances that raised similar concerns. Investigators began asking a question that had haunted Amber's case for more than a year. Was the person responsible still unknown because he had successfully hidden his actions? Or had the answer been present all along? As law enforcement agencies examined Gardner's connection to Chelsea's case, attention returned to Amber's disappearance. The investigation that had once lacked direction suddenly had a potential suspect. But suspicion was not enough. Detectives still needed evidence. They needed to determine whether Gardner had any connection to Amber's final moments. They needed to understand what had happened after she left home on that February morning. They needed answers for a family that had waited 13 months for them. The breakthrough came through the investigation into Gardner. After his arrest in connection with Chelsea King, authorities continued gathering information. During the legal process, Gardner eventually admitted responsibility for the murders of both Chelsea King and Amber Duboce. His confession confirmed what investigators had hoped and feared at the same time. Amber's disappearance had not been a runaway case. It had not been an accident. It had been a criminal act. For Amber's family, the confession brought a complicated form of closure. After more than a year of uncertainty, they finally knew what had happened. But knowing the truth did not undo the loss. In missing person cases, families often experience a painful contradiction. They spend months or years hoping for any information, any clue, any sign. Then the answer finally arrives. But sometimes the answer brings grief rather than relief. For Amber's loved ones, the search for a missing daughter became a mourning process for a life that had been taken away. The confession also allowed investigators to reconstruct parts of Amber's final day. According to court records, Gardner admitted that he encountered Amber while she was walking to school. He acknowledged responsibility for abducting and killing her. The details confirmed the worst fears of those who had searched for her. A 14-year-old girl had been targeted during what should have been a routine morning. The case that had remained unsolved for more than a year finally had an explanation. But one important question remained. Where was Amber? Even after Gardner's confession, investigators needed to locate her remains. For the family, finding Amber was the final unanswered part of the journey. A confession could explain what happened, but it could not bring her home. Search teams returned to work, now guided by information connected to Gardner. The focus shifted from searching broadly across unknown possibilities to examining specific locations. Investigators looked for the place where Amber had been taken after her abduction. They followed information provided through the investigation. They searched areas that had previously held no clear connection to the case. Finally, on March 6, 2010, more than a year after Amber disappeared, investigators located human remains in a remote area of the Pala Indian Reservation. The discovery marked the end of the search for Amber. The remains were later identified as Amber Duboce through dental records. For the investigators who had worked the case, it was the conclusion of a 13-month investigation. For the community, it was confirmation of a tragedy they had feared. For Amber's family, it was the moment when uncertainty finally ended. But the discovery also transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide investigation with a confirmed victim, a confirmed suspect, and a legal path toward justice. The search for Amber had finally reached its destination. But the questions surrounding how the system had failed to prevent such a tragedy were only beginning. As investigators and the public examined Gardner's history, attention turned toward a larger issue. How had someone with a serious criminal record remained capable of committing another violent crime? Could Amber's death have been prevented? And what changes were necessary to protect future victims? Those questions would eventually lead to major discussions about sex offender supervision, criminal justice policy, and public safety throughout California. But before the focus shifted toward reform, the immediate priority was justice for Amber and Chelsea. The next stage of the case would move from investigation to the courtroom, where John Albert Gardner III would finally face the consequences of his actions. The discovery of Amber Duboce remains on March 6, 2010, brought an end to a search that had lasted more than 13 months. For the investigators who had worked the case from the beginning, it was a moment filled with conflicting emotions. Finding Amber answered the question that had remained unanswered since February 2009, but it also confirmed the outcome that everyone had hoped to avoid. Amber was no longer a missing child. She was a victim of homicide. For her family, the discovery represented the end of an unbearable period of uncertainty. For more than a year, they had lived between hope and fear, never knowing whether Amber might return home or whether they would receive devastating news. That uncertainty is one of the most painful experiences faced by families of missing persons. There is no clear goodbye. No opportunity to fully grieve. No certainty about what happened. Every possibility remains open. A phone call could bring answers. A stranger's information could change everything. A new search could finally lead to the person they had been waiting for. For Amber's family, that waiting period ended when investigators confirmed that the remains discovered in the remote area of the Pala Indian Reservation belonged to their daughter. The identification was made through dental records, a standard forensic method used when remains are recovered and visual identification is not possible. The process was necessary because time and environmental conditions can make identification difficult. Investigators must rely on scientific evidence to ensure accuracy and provide families with confirmed answers. The confirmation transformed the investigation. For months, authorities had been searching for a missing teenager. Now they had a homicide victim. The focus shifted toward understanding the circumstances of Amber's death and ensuring that the person responsible would be held accountable. At the center of that investigation was John Albert Gardner III. Gardner had already become the focus of law enforcement attention after the disappearance and murder of Chelsea King. The similarities between the two cases had led detectives to examine whether one person could be responsible for both crimes. The connection was eventually confirmed. Gardner admitted responsibility for killing both Amber and Chelsea. His confession provided investigators with information about Amber's final moments and allowed them to understand how her disappearance had occurred. According to the details presented during the legal proceedings, Gardner encountered Amber while she was walking to school. He admitted that he abducted her, sexually assaulted her, and killed her. The confession answered many investigative questions. But it also raised deeper ones. How had Gardner been able to commit another violent crime after already serving time for a previous sexual offense? Why had his history not prevented him from having access to potential victims? Could more have been done to identify the danger he represented? Those questions became central discussions after the case became public. Before those broader issues were examined, however, investigators continued focusing on the evidence. A major part of solving any homicide case involves reconstructing the timeline. Detectives attempt to understand. Where was the victim? Who had contact with them? What happened during the final known moments? How did the suspect move from one location to another? In Amber's case, the timeline became clearer after Gardner's confession and the discovery of her remains. The investigation confirmed that her disappearance was not random in the sense of being impossible to understand. It was connected to the actions of a person who had previously demonstrated a willingness to harm a child. That fact was deeply disturbing to the community. Many residents had followed Amber's case from the beginning. They had participated in searches, shared missing person information, and hoped that she would eventually be found alive. The discovery changed the emotional landscape of Escondido. The community was no longer searching for answers about where Amber was. They were mourning the loss of a young person whose future had been taken away. Memorials and public tributes reflected the impact Amber had made even beyond those who knew her personally. People who had never met her felt connected to her story because her disappearance represented a fear shared by many parents. The fear that a child could leave home for an ordinary reason and never return. The case also highlighted the importance of victim identification in criminal investigations. Amber was not simply evidence in a legal process. She was the reason the investigation existed. Her interests, her goals, and her personality mattered because they reminded everyone of what had been lost. The legal system would later focus on Gardner's actions, but the investigation began and ended with Amber. The purpose was not only to identify a suspect. It was to provide answers for a family. It was to recognize the life of a teenager who had been taken away far too soon. As investigators prepared the case for prosecution, they also reviewed Gardner's previous criminal history. In 2000, Gardner had been convicted after attacking a 13-year-old girl. That conviction resulted in imprisonment and required him to register as a sex offender after his release. The fact that a previously convicted offender had later become responsible for the murders of Amber and Chelsea led to widespread public anger and demands for change. People questioned whether existing monitoring systems had been effective enough. They questioned whether law enforcement agencies had sufficient tools to identify high-risk offenders. They questioned whether more could have been done before another young victim was harmed. These concerns would eventually contribute to legislative changes in California, including efforts associated with Chelsea's law, which strengthened certain restrictions and monitoring measures for some serious sex offenders. However, those changes came after the tragedy. They could not change what had already happened. They could not restore Amber's future. They could not erase the pain experienced by her family. The discovery of Amber's remains provided a conclusion to one part of the case, but it opened another chapter. The investigation had found the victim. It had identified the suspect. Now the justice system would determine the consequences. John Albert Gardner III would face prosecution for the murders of Amber Duboce and Chelsea King, along with additional charges related to another attempted attack. The courtroom would become the next stage of a case that had already transformed a community. There, prosecutors would present the evidence. Gardner would make a decision that would avoid a potential death sentence. And the families of Amber and Chelsea would finally have the opportunity to speak publicly about the lives stolen from them. The search had ended. The truth had emerged. But justice was only beginning. For more than a year, the disappearance of Amber Duboce remained one of the most frustrating and emotionally difficult investigations in San Diego County. The case contained many of the elements that make missing person investigations especially challenging. A young victim. A limited timeline. A disappearance in a public area. And almost no physical evidence. From the outside, it might have appeared that investigators simply needed to find the right clue. But inside the investigation, detectives faced a far more complicated reality. They were attempting to solve a crime without knowing exactly what crime had occurred. At the beginning, Amber was a missing teenager. There was no confirmed crime scene. There was no confirmed suspect. There was no confirmed evidence that a criminal act had taken place. Investigators had to work through possibilities one by one. Every theory had to be considered. Every lead had to be evaluated. Every assumption had to be tested. The first hours and days after Amber disappeared were filled with urgent activity. Officers gathered information about her last known movements. Detectives interviewed family members, friends, classmates, teachers, and anyone who might have seen her that morning. The goal was to build a picture of Amber's life before she disappeared. What was her normal routine? Who did she communicate with? Were there any changes in her behavior? Was there anyone who might have wanted to harm her? These questions are standard in missing person investigations because understanding the victim's routine often reveals what is unusual. In Amber's case, investigators found a pattern of stability. She attended school. She maintained relationships with family and friends. She participated in activities connected to her interests. There were no clear indications that she planned to leave home. No evidence suggested she had arranged to meet someone. No signs indicated she was preparing for a new life away from her family. The more investigators learned about Amber, the stronger the possibility became that she had encountered danger during her normal routine. But proving that was another challenge. A disappearance without a visible crime scene leaves investigators searching for something they cannot see. There was no location where detectives could immediately collect evidence. No obvious struggle. No confirmed vehicle. No identified person who had last been with her. The investigation depended heavily on reconstruction. Detectives worked backward. They studied the route Amber was believed to have taken. They examined the timeline between leaving home and failing to arrive at school. They considered who had the opportunity to encounter her during that narrow window. A 15-minute walk became the most important period of time in the entire case. Every street. Every intersection. Every possible witness. Every nearby property. All became part of the investigation. The area around Escondido High School received significant attention because Amber was expected to arrive there. Investigators needed to determine whether she had reached the campus or disappeared before entering school grounds. Available information suggested she never made it inside. That meant the critical moment occurred somewhere before the school day began. The investigation also included examining possible suspects. In a case involving a missing teenager, detectives must consider many different possibilities. A stranger. Someone known to the victim. Someone with a personal connection. Someone who happened to be in the area. The process requires examining facts rather than relying on assumptions. Investigators reviewed people who had interacted with Amber. They examined information about individuals living nearby. They looked into reports of suspicious activity. They followed tips from the public. One category of information received particular attention: registered sex offenders in the area. This was a standard investigative step, especially given the victim's age and the circumstances of her disappearance. Among the names reviewed was John Albert Gardner III. Gardner was already known to law enforcement. His criminal history included a serious sexual offense against a 13-year-old girl in 2000. The case involved violence and sexual assault. After serving his sentence, Gardner returned to the community and was required to register as a sex offender. His history made him someone investigators would naturally consider during a case involving a missing teenage girl. However, at that time, consideration did not equal proof. Gardner's name appearing in records did not establish that he had anything to do with Amber's disappearance. Investigators needed a direct connection. They needed evidence showing that he had encountered Amber or participated in the crime. Without that evidence, there was no legal basis for arrest. This distinction would become one of the most discussed aspects of the case after Gardner was eventually identified as the person responsible. Looking back with knowledge of the outcome, it may seem surprising that Gardner was not immediately arrested. But criminal investigations do not operate with the benefit of hindsight. Detectives in 2009 did not know what would happen in 2010. They did not know Gardner would later be connected to another murder. They did not know that evidence from another case would finally unlock Amber's case. At the time, they had only the information available to them. And that information was incomplete. Throughout 2009, investigators continued searching for new evidence. The public played an important role. Community members shared information, reported possible sightings, and helped distribute Amber's photograph. The case received significant media coverage, particularly because of Amber's age and the circumstances of her disappearance. But media attention also created challenges. High-profile cases often generate large numbers of tips. Some are valuable. Some are based on misunderstanding. Some are simply rumors. Detectives had to carefully examine each piece of information while avoiding distractions that could slow the investigation. The search itself was extensive. Volunteers and law enforcement personnel covered large areas. They searched parks, open fields, trails, and locations throughout the region. Each search represented hope. Each unsuccessful search brought disappointment. The passage of time became one of the greatest obstacles. As months passed, the possibility of finding Amber alive became increasingly uncertain. Yet the investigation continued. Her case remained open. Her name remained active. Detectives continued reviewing information whenever new leads appeared. For Amber's family, the waiting was devastating. They had to live with uncertainty while also maintaining hope. They continued asking the public for information. They continued keeping Amber's story visible. They refused to allow her disappearance to become forgotten. But behind the scenes, investigators faced the reality that many cold cases face. Sometimes the missing piece is not a lack of effort. Sometimes it is the absence of one crucial piece of evidence. A witness who remembers something important. A forensic connection. A confession. A discovery. For Amber's case, that missing piece would eventually come from an unexpected source. Not from the original investigation. Not from a newly discovered witness. But from another tragedy that occurred in the same region. When 17-year-old Chelsea King disappeared near Lake Hodges in February 2010, investigators found evidence that changed everything. The suspect they identified was John Albert Gardner III. And suddenly, a name that had once been only one among many possibilities became the center of two homicide investigations. The discovery would reveal that Amber's case had never been an isolated mystery. It was part of a much larger and more disturbing story. The breakthrough was finally approaching. But it would come after another family experienced the same unimaginable pain that Amber's family had endured for more than a year. For 13 months, investigators searching for Amber Duboce had been trying to solve a mystery with incomplete information. They knew Amber had disappeared while walking to school. They knew she had not arrived at her destination. They knew her family was waiting for answers. But they did not know who was responsible. The investigation had examined countless possibilities, followed hundreds of leads, and involved the efforts of law enforcement officers, volunteers, and community members. Yet the case remained without a resolution. Then, in February 2010, another disappearance changed the direction of everything. On February 25, 2010, 17-year-old Chelsea King disappeared while running near Lake Hodges in San Diego County. Like Amber, Chelsea was a teenager living an ordinary life. Like Amber, she vanished during a normal daytime activity. Like Amber, her disappearance immediately raised serious concerns. Investigators responded quickly. The search for Chelsea involved many of the same urgent questions that had surrounded Amber's case. Where had she gone? Who had been near her? What happened during the final moments before she disappeared? But unlike Amber's investigation, authorities soon found evidence that provided a path forward. The evidence led investigators to John Albert Gardner III. Gardner was not a stranger to the criminal justice system. Years earlier, he had been convicted of a serious sexual offense involving a 13-year-old girl. After completing his sentence, he returned to the community as a registered sex offender. His name was already known. His history was documented. But until Chelsea's disappearance, investigators had no evidence connecting him to Amber. The arrest of Gardner created a dramatic shift in the investigation. Detectives now had a suspect. They had evidence from a new case. And they had an unresolved case involving another teenage girl from the same region. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Investigators began reviewing Amber's disappearance with renewed attention. This process, known as a case comparison or linkage analysis, is common when detectives believe a suspect may have committed multiple crimes. They examine whether the circumstances, methods, victim characteristics, and locations share meaningful patterns. The purpose is not to assume guilt. The purpose is to discover connections. In Amber's case, investigators looked again at everything they had collected over the previous year. Witness statements, timeline information, search records, background information, previous leads. Details that had once seemed incomplete were now examined through a different lens. The investigation had changed because the central question was no longer only, where did Amber go? It became, was Amber another victim of the same person? The possibility was deeply troubling. Gardner's criminal history made the question even more urgent. His previous conviction showed that he had already targeted a young teenage girl. That history did not prove involvement in Amber's disappearance, but it made investigators take the possibility seriously. They continued gathering evidence. They reviewed Gardner's movements. They examined forensic information. They searched for any connection between him and Amber's final known moments. The investigation that had been stalled for months began moving rapidly. Eventually, Gardner admitted responsibility for Amber's murder. His confession confirmed that the teenager who had disappeared while walking to school had not left voluntarily. She had been the victim of a violent crime. For Amber's family, the confession brought an answer after more than a year of uncertainty. But it also brought a new kind of pain. Many families of missing persons spend months hoping for any information at all. They imagine different possibilities because uncertainty allows hope to survive. When the truth finally arrives, that uncertainty disappears. But the grief remains. Knowing what happened does not erase what was lost. Following Gardner's confession, investigators focused on locating Amber's remains. Finding her became a priority. For the family, this was more than a recovery effort. It was the final step in bringing Amber home. A confession could explain the crime. A confession could identify the person responsible. But the search was not complete until Amber herself was found. Investigators followed information connected to Gardner and began searching locations associated with the case. On March 6, 2010, search teams discovered human remains in a remote area of the Pala Indian Reservation. The location was approximately 30 miles from where Amber had disappeared. The discovery represented the conclusion of a search that had lasted over a year. The remains were later identified as Amber Duboce through dental records. The confirmation was devastating but significant. For investigators, it provided the final piece needed to complete the homicide investigation. For Amber's family, it ended the painful uncertainty of not knowing. For the community, it confirmed the tragedy many had feared. The case that had begun as a missing child investigation had become one of California's most closely watched murder cases. The discovery also raised difficult questions about prevention. Gardner's previous criminal history became a major focus of public discussion. Many people questioned whether the system had done enough to monitor someone with a history of sexual violence. They questioned whether additional safeguards could have prevented Amber's death and Chelsea King's death. Those questions extended beyond one individual. They became part of a larger conversation about how society manages offenders who have demonstrated dangerous behavior. In the aftermath of the case, lawmakers and officials examined changes to California's approach toward serious sex offenders. The tragedy involving Amber and Chelsea eventually contributed to support for stronger restrictions and monitoring measures through legislation known as Chelsea's Law. The purpose of these changes was to reduce the risk of future victims. But no law could change what had already happened. No policy could return Amber to her family. No investigation could restore the future she had planned. The breakthrough in the case solved a mystery. But it also revealed a failure that many people struggled to accept. The person responsible had not appeared from nowhere. He had a documented history. He had already been convicted of harming a child. And after his release, he was able to commit another series of devastating crimes. As the legal process moved forward, investigators continued examining every detail of Gardner's actions. Prosecutors prepared their case. Families prepared to face the person responsible in court. The community prepared to hear the final chapter of a tragedy that had begun with a 14-year-old girl simply walking to school. The mystery of Amber Duboce had finally been solved. But the search for justice was only beginning.